To all. We are privileged to have today with us Dr. Ritu Mathur, Senior Energy Specialist from NITI Aayog today. Actually, she was slated to give her presentation during the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav week we had in Ministry of Coal on 9th of March, but due to some reason it rolled over and we are having it today. I would request Secretary Sir we also have Mr. Rajnath Ram, Advisor Energy from NITI Aayog, and I would request Secretary Sir to welcome them with our green gesture. It's part of our ministry's green commitment.
Thank you.
Sir, please.
Thank you.
Rajnath Ram, could you please step forward? Thank you so much. Brief about Dr. Ritu Mathur, who will be presenting on energy transition today. Dr. Ritu Mathur is a multidisciplinary research professional who has been working in the fields of sustainable development, energy security, mitigation, and climate change for around 3 decades. She is an economist by training with a PhD in energy science from Kyoto University, Japan. She is currently leading the integrated assessment and modeling at NITI Aayog as a senior energy economist after being associated with TERI and TERI School of Advanced Studies in the Department of Energy and Environment. She has been associated with the IPCC process as lead author and reviewer across various reports and is part of the global network of integrated assessment modelers contributing to scenario building and mitigation related modeling using rigorous and robust global and national level models and frameworks to deliver outputs that contribute to scientific assessments and literature. At the country level, some of our main contributions have been towards providing policy inputs for the formulation of India's NDCs, the National Action Plan on Climate Change, and various national energy plans. Over the last few years, her work has focused on examining energy efficiency prospects across sectors, examining the possibilities and implications of decarbonization pathways and scenarios that could lead India towards a net zero emission. Additionally, she has been looking at new approaches to study the role of energy innovation and systems transition towards improved well-being and sustainable development of the economy. Over to you, ma'am, for the presentation. Thank you.
Feel free from there or here, wherever you want.
Good morning, and I'm delighted to be here. I think the topic itself of energy transition is an extremely important one for all of us. And I think jointly we are also seeking your feedback and views in terms of where coal stands in the whole game, because this is one of the most important parts for India in the energy sector. So going ahead, basically today's presentation will look at the contextualization of the transition towards net zero, why we need it and why this is coming around, talk a little bit about the status of the energy sector, why we need a transformative change and what kind of shifts would be associated in this move.
वहाँ माइक तो है ना, बाहर जा रही है ना वॉइस जा रहा है, ठीक है.
What the challenges are for India in terms of managing a smooth transition, and then looking at what it means for decarbonizing various sectors and the way forward. So quickly, with regards to contextualization of the transition towards net zero, if we look at the whole debate surrounding climate change and where it stands, India's share in the contribution to cumulative global carbon emissions has been very minuscule over the entire time period. This is just a depiction of the total gigatons of CO2 equivalent in terms of the total carbon space that has been taken up in looking at in limiting the temperature increase to 1.5 degree C. And if we look at the entire carbon space, that was about 2,800 gigatons CO2 equivalent, of which 2,400 has already been utilized. So we are left with a very small carbon space. And India's own carbon space utilization from the period 1850 to 2019 has also been fairly small as compared to what the developed countries have already taken up. So, in fact, the historical utilization has been just about 1.8% of the total carbon space if we look at this level. And as per the principle of equitable carbon space, India's share should have been somewhere around 490 gigatons in absolute terms. So we are already talking about a scenario where the developed countries have not only eaten up into the space, not allowing us to go as per the levels we should have ideally had in terms of an equitable share. And therefore the principle of equitable carbon space is also among the most or least talked about principle. All other kinds of principles are put on the table, but not this one, because it does not even allow for that kind of space to India any longer. If we look at, therefore, where it places us in the debate and in looking at our commitments, it is also extremely important to remember that developing nations have a right to grow under the treaties that we have in the climate change domain. It is not contingent on countries like India to necessarily say that we would also not develop or constrain any kind of activity which would lead to the improvement of our people or of the human development and well-being. So it becomes important to keep the development perspective as the framing, as the way to go forward, but at the same time try to look at ways to reduce the emissions and try to remain within the space if we have to be talking about the dialogue in the climate arena as well. In terms of looking at the numbers again, the per capita GDP of Australia, Canada, Italy, Japan, etc. have been more than $40,000 in 2017 PPP terms in their respective peaking years. The per capita GDP of middle income countries was around 11,000 USD in comparison, and India's per capita income in 2020 was just a mere 6,000 odd US dollars in 2020. So there's making the point that in terms of improving our well-being, in terms of going forward in our development, even if we were to peg ourselves at the level of the middle income countries, we have way to go and way to look forward in terms of improving our levels of per capita GDP. Therefore, developing countries like India are justified to put this point forward in looking at our climate commitments, make sure that we move towards greater prosperity. So having a robust GDP growth is extremely important. And also it has been observed that for developing countries, there's a high correlation between energy consumption and HDI. A small increment in energy use can correspond to a relatively large increase in HDI, especially at the lower levels. So again, there are studies which have shown that if we went ahead with providing access to energy for all, at the lowest levels where people do not consume anything, when we are providing the access and as people start to have energy and use appliances, the amount of increment in terms of how much energy they consume or how much emissions they would emit is relatively very, very small. So it does not leave a very large footprint, and therefore again it is important that we remember that providing access is not something that we should deprive people of, and overall the development should continue to be there. As of course people have higher and higher levels of consumption, improve their levels of well-being even further, the trade-off in trying to control the level of efficiencies and the level of decarbonization becomes a little more difficult, and it is at this stage where India is likely to have a greater challenge in managing its decarbonization as it develops. So India is in a unique position of needing to decouple its emissions while providing for higher energy needs And this will, of course, need disruptive changes. It will need policies or changes in technologies along this pathway in ways that developed countries have not done it in the past. So we need to have our own way of going ahead to manage this twin challenge. India, of course, has been in a state of leadership, even in the past when it comes to clean energy policies, when it comes to efficient use of energy, and India still remains committed to a clean energy future. At the COP26, the Prime Minister had put forward the Panchamrit commitments as well, which delineate the need for reaching 500 gigawatt non-fossil installed power generation capacity by 2030, having 50% installed power capacity based on renewables by the same year, reduction in total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons by 2030, and having a reduction in carbon intensity of GDP at a level of 45% from 2005 levels by 2030, as also reaching a net zero target by 2070. So these are extremely ambitious targets, extremely ambitious commitments, but at the same time pose to us a kind of a goalpost, a kind of a level that we must aspire to or try to reach, and which makes it imperative to see what is the path in reaching there as we go forward. So quickly looking at where we stand today in terms of the status, if we look at India's current primary mix, again, coal has a share of more than 50% in the total primary energy supply. Crude oil and oil products as well as natural gas also are important parts of our primary energy mix. Renewables have started to, new renewables like solar and wind have started to gradually come in, but still have a relatively minor share. But with our policies, we have been able to move towards a reduction in GHG emission intensity from 2005 levels of about 27% in the energy sector in 2020. In terms of installed power capacity, again, as we see, the share largely rests on coal, which dominates the power generation sector, and more than 40% of non-fossil based installed power capacity exists as of now. In terms of the generation mix, again, coal has a dominant share of about 73%, and although the capacities of solar and wind have been increasing much more rapidly, the contribution on the generation side is just about 10% or so. So if we look at where we are in terms of going ahead when we talk about the future, the point that I make about the need for a transformative change stems for how we might have been had we gone on a business as usual or a reference scenario vis-a-vis what we might need to do when we move towards highly decarbonized scenarios like what we are proposing. So this picturization here gives a trend from various modeling studies which we've put together, including the exercise that we have also been doing at NITI Aayog in terms of the IESS tool that we've been using, and Mr. Jain has been the kingpin in starting this tool development at NITI. If you look at all these lines from the level of 2020 in terms of per capita energy consumption, in a reference scenario, all models seem to suggest that we would need to increase our per capita energy consumption going forward. Similarly, the per capita emissions in all the scenarios would also be upward rising. And this is definitely not a direction which can be possible if we have a net zero target of 2070. So if we look at the decarbonization kind of scenarios, depending on the level of stringency and the various assumptions across all the studies, the per capita energy consumption starts tapering, plateauing, slightly bending in most of the models. But in terms of per capita emissions, they must need to plateau or even bend down very strongly in most of the models when we are looking at the future. So this is a very different visualization from where we are headed and where we need to go. And therefore the point about the need for transformative and very big changes in what we need to do from now to 2070 become imminent. So what kind of shifts would be needed across the energy mix and across the different sectors becomes important to start visualizing so that we are able to move in that direction. And this is an illustrative scenario which we've again worked at NITI, which shows the spread of primary energy mix and how that might change over time. So the gray part here represents the coal, the orange is oil and gas in the orange and red, and then the green parts are the renewable energy parts. So we can see broadly that the transition from a fossil dominant economy to a renewable dominant economy is needed in a gradual way. And from 83% fossil dependency in 2020, India's primary energy mix will have to progressively become about 85% non-fossil based by 2030 if we need to move in that direction. So this is again a picturization of how the pie looks in terms of primary energy supply mix in the years 2030 and 2070. And again, in 2030, we see a large part of the pie still being based on coal, nearly 50%, with natural gas 8% and crude oil and petroleum products about 22%. But by 2070, a large part in green, reflecting the need for how much RE will need to penetrate, and coal probably having a share of just about 8% or so, natural gas at 3%, and petroleum products at about 4%. So that's a very, very large and different kind of a scenario that we visualize as we go forward by 2070. So what would be the kind of implications of this kind of a transition if it were to happen? India would probably need renewables capacity of more than 7,000 gigawatt by 2070 if we have similar kind of technology, similar kind of needs. This would necessitate, therefore, very, very large-scale penetration of energy storage technologies to reduce the dependence on fossil power plants. And as of now, we know that energy storage is the stumbling block when it comes to a large-scale RE application, and the costs of storage and batteries are still fairly high. So how this would happen is another challenge which would come about. Nuclear and several other alternatives will definitely need to play a role, and there is no single bullet which can really solve India's challenges. So this would need to play a crucial role for providing baseload capacity for the clean energy transition and net zero pathways as well. Biomass-based fuels, CBG, etc. will need to play a crucial role. Large hydro projects would also need to support the net zero drive. And in looking at all of this, India would need at least a minimum capital investment of about $200 to $250 billion per year to prepare its energy system for a net zero pathway. So this is a lot of investment, it's a lot of technological change which will need to come in, and therefore low cost finance and technological disruptions are extremely necessary to enable such kind of energy transition. So the challenges ahead are numerous, they are immense. And if we look at the coal transition itself towards decarbonization, a number of questions arise in terms of the adequacy of domestic coal supply, in terms of the requisite quantity but also quality required for the power and industry sectors, especially given if we were to also think at the same time about self-sufficiency or not relying on imports. India again has large reserves, but these are relatively of poor quality. So whether the steel sector, for example, can completely move away from import dependency and base it on Indian fuels is a question that stares us in the face. Are the resources also amenable to coal gasification, and how does this technology rest in terms of its techno-economics for use of clean coal if that were an important element of our transition story? What role can CCUS play, and are our seams again amenable to the carbon capture in terms of the technology, how the costs can come down? All of these are again very important questions. And also, how do we enable just transition? When it comes to our coal resources, they are concentrated in certain locations, and the entire economy, the entire ecosystem of those areas have a lot of indirect impacts when it comes to shift away from coal. So thinking about all the activities and all the people in those regions becomes contingent on us as we go forward in thinking about this transition as well. So, like I mentioned, the proven reserves are fairly large in case of India. India accounts for about 10% of global proved reserves in coal. But if we look at the imports, both non-coking and coking coal imports are significant at the moment. And non-coking coal come from different countries like Indonesia, South Africa, and Australia. But in terms of coking coal, while we may be able to think of options in the power sector, what can we do in terms of the prime coking coal dependency that we currently have remains a challenge. Even over time, what we notice is that the imports of non-coking coal have fluctuated, but coking coal imports have continued to rise steadily. This is again a picturization of the industrial coal demand projections put together at NITI from different studies and showing what the kind of industry coal demand projections might be as we go ahead till 2040. And according to most estimates, industrial coal demand could at least double by this time period. So while our sector is already talking about a possible move towards renewable energy, in the industry sector we still have a lot of dependency, and the others sector in the industry which does not get captured by the major players, steel, cement, aluminum, and so on, still continues to depend actually quite heavily on coal. So we don't have too much knowledge about what are the efficiencies of these processes, whether process changes can happen there, whether fuel changes can happen there. So while we talk more about the steel, cement, and major energy intensive sectors, thinking about the total use in the industry, whether it is for captive or it is for process heat, again is a very, very important part of the challenge. These are again some initial projections that we have from the ISS tool at NITI, where we've tried to work out what the coal demand trajectories would be in the year 2030 and 2047. So if we look at the graph on the left, this is the coal requirement in the power sector. And if you look at the red line, that is where we would be in sort of a reference scenario, and the green line depicts where we might be moving in terms of a decarbonization scenario. What is important, however, is apart from the gap, which shows that the transformation will need to be extremely large, is what is important is also the shape of that curve, of the decarbonization curve, which suggests that till 2040, while we need to keep coming down, the amount of coal is still fairly significant, even in the power sector. So the point that coal would need to support RE still, and we are hoping that storage and other technologies would be able to bring in RE to an increasing extent. But it's not that the phase down of coal in the power sector also can be extremely rapid or immediate. Till 2030, we also see it slightly increasing per se, and then sort of tapering off and coming down. So managing the transition in the next 2 decades, I think, is a very, very important thing that we have to address in how much coal will really be required and how quickly should we talk about a possibility of bringing down the level of coal. In terms of industry, again, in the second graph, we see that there is a reduction, but again, too much of the coal cannot be displaced away from industry. It does not even start to bend down in terms of the requirement for coal by 2047. So there are enough processes, or there are enough of the other small users, but which add up to a considerable amount of coal requirement still by the industry by 2047. So the total coal demand trajectory does start bending down, but again, uh, the requirements for coal will remain till 2050 at least. So in terms of the coal sector challenges, and I mean, of course, everybody here is well versed with some of these, but
Welcome to Blue Jeans.
Given our
To
high
connect-
percentage of open cast mines, the challenges of land acquisition for removing the overburden, delays in project execution because of the need for forest clearances and so on are important to address. Infrastructure bottlenecks do exist. There's lack of first mile connectivity in certain projects. The logistics in terms of the movement by railways for coal evacuation often comes up as a challenge. The delivered cost of coal at different locations due to taxes, levies, etc. Again is a issue depending on where the consumers are located. In terms of mine developers and operators, again, there are limited numbers in the market, and there's also poor economic viability of underground coal mining beyond 300 meters depth, although we have a lot of reserves below that level. And in terms of coal gasification technology or even CCUS, which may be clean coal options for us, we still need to work further on the technologies, both in terms of their economics and figuring out the viability, so that these may become part of the solution as we go ahead. In terms of the renewable sector, again, one of the biggest challenges is its seamless integration with the grid. And as I had mentioned, given that the cost of storage is still high and the technology in terms of the size of batteries and so on, there are several challenges in the integration. While this happens and while we need to keep working at it, the problem becomes of how soon can it be done and what will be the trade-off directly in terms of the need for coal in the power sector as we make this transition. So this is about managing the next 2 decades and following this very closely in terms of how this development and progress happens or does not happen. That said, of course, energy storage is going to be very important to the success towards a decarbonized pathway, and there are multiple benefits of being able to bring in energy storage and get over the issues related to RE intermittency and have firm power dispatches available. So there are again a number of options which can be brought in and are being looked at in terms of energy storage, whether it's in terms of pumped hydro or battery or CAES. So these are again technologies at various levels of development, and some or all of these will at some point need to come into the solution to manage the transition as well. In terms of the other sectors, transport, industry, etc., other than power, again, we are heavily fossil dependent at the moment. And as I said, there's no single bullet, and RE is not the only option in terms of solar and wind when we are looking at the entire energy transition and decarbonization story. The national policy of biofuels has been put forward, but going ahead, we need to be looking at how to adopt the first generation, second generation, and third generation of biofuels, and looking at how this can be ramped up going ahead. So there is a rollout plan, but again, needs to scale up very quickly. When we are looking at compressed biogas, again, the installed capacity of biogas projects as shown here has been varying over the years, and there is about 60 MMT of potential when we look at biogas sources also in the country. So with the biogas policy interventions, this is again something which will play a role in moving towards alternatives. Green hydrogen is again something which also needs to be looked at with great detail in terms of its application, not only across different sectors in the transition, but also in terms of its uses across different sectors and the role that it can play overall in the economy in terms of becoming one of the most competitive sources of India becoming one of the most competitive sources of green hydrogen production in the world, so that we may even think about exports in the future. This is something which is likely to evolve in the global economy as we go ahead. So given that a multiplicity of things will need to be done in terms of the way forward, when we look at the coal sector, it is extremely important to ensure just transition, because coal has more than 50% share in India's energy basket, and this will need to be looked at very closely to see how and what we must do year on year as different alternatives start to become viable or usable across sectors. We need to look deeply into expanding the application of coal in terms of coal gasification and how the conversion from coal to chemicals can help in the transition, but also at carbon capture, utilization and storage, and how we should make our power plants as well as the industry CCUS ready at what point in time, and how this might again play out in the transition. In terms of the oil and gas sector, again, there's a need to expand the portfolio of bioenergy by scaling up the applications of both biofuels and CBG, the need for looking at marketing and pricing freedom in this sector, and also enhancing the domestic exploration in looking forward towards self-sufficiency is imminent. In terms of nuclear, again, there's a need to focus on small modular reactors and micro modular reactors, because again these can play a critical role in providing baseload capacity in our energy mix, and how we bring about enabling policies to encourage private sector participation in these technologies is again important going ahead. In the renewable sector, again, ways to look at exploitation of the maximum RE potential is important. We would need to scale up rooftop solar again, which again we have a great potential, but it has not taken off in an extremely big way. The need to promote large hydro projects, accelerate distributed RE, but also explore geothermal and tidal energy, which may have some scope. As mentioned earlier, the need for increasing the power system flexibility to manage the grid with variable share of RE is again extremely important. And green hydrogen production with a view to not only catering to our own domestic production for use in the industry and transport, but also looking at a larger opportunity in the export market is important. In terms of energy efficiency, again, given that we started with saying that India needs to manage this challenge of decoupling its energy emissions while continuing to grow, energy efficiency will continue to have a role, if not in bending the curve of per capita energy requirements downwards, but at least in managing to contain the growth rate of the increase in per capita energy requirements. So again, decarbonization and energy efficiency will need to go hand in hand together. And while we need more penetration of RE in the power generation, green hydrogen to play a role in decarbonizing the hard to abate sectors, the transport sector needing to look at not only EVs in the two-wheeler, three-wheeler, and four-wheeler categories, but also looking at alternatives such as LNG and green hydrogen in the commercial transport vehicles, and demand electrification again, which can itself bring in efficiencies, and which is currently at a level of 18%, needing to be increased, because then again this brings in the opportunity to decarbonize, but also reduce the energy demand itself. So there are all these things which need to be done, extremely challenging, but also extremely important, and needing to be looked at continuously in terms of a transition that we take forward. Demand side measures, again, extremely important to look at their potential and leverage AI-based technologies to create energy efficient solutions, and of course focusing on the circular economy in terms of facilitating the transition from a linear to a circular economy will make it contingent to also look at strategic and critical minerals, scrap metals and how we use them, e-waste and their adoption and so on. So with that, I would end the presentation. I'm happy to take it.
Would you like to come in? I think I haven't seen a, straightforward and a simple language presentation. Kyo, Bhavani?
Yes, sir.
When you talk of energy modeling and projection, people confuse, confound. This is very simple.
Straightforward and very clear, comprehensive with all the data, his facts and figures. So,
There is not a better person in India than Dr. Mathur
in
to handle this subject.
terms of policy perspective, it is very, very clear, sir. So,
But that said, I think the challenge is not mine now. And more than, what happens in 2070, I think the road to 2070, and especially the next 2 decades, as we pointed out in the IESS scenarios as well, is what becomes very important to closely monitor. And I think that's where we look forward to, working closely with the ministry in terms of what can be done, how much can be done, and your feedback also in terms of.
So I had 2 questions, since people are hesitant, maybe then they will get going. कि देखिए, यूरोप में तो ज़्यादा गैस नहीं है, खुद की नहीं है, लेकिन गैस बाहर से आती है. नॉर्वे देता है, रशिया देता है, मेडिटेरेनियन से जाती है और कतर से भी जाती है, यूएस से भी आने लग गई. तो उन लोगों ने ब्लू हाइड्रोजन का काम शुरू कर दिया है. सो बेसिकली ग्रीन हाइड्रोजन तो वो है जो कि रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी से बनेगी, उसमें कोई एमिशन इन्वॉल्व नहीं होगा. वो इलेक्ट्रिसिटी लेंगे, सोलर की या बिजली की, पानी को स्प्लिट कर देंगे, इलेक्ट्रोलिसिस, तो हाइड्रोजन निकल आएगी, हाइड्रोजन को जला लेंगे, हाइड्रोजन को जलाएंगे तो वाटर बनेगा. उसका जो बाय प्रोडक्ट है वाटर है. बट दैट टेक्नोलॉजी इज स्टिल नॉट वायबल. इट्स commercially not implemented anywhere in the world, as we all know. So they have now gone on to the blue hydrogen route from gas. अब वो गैस में तो कार्बन होता ही है, CH4 है, मीथेन है, CH3, CH4, तो हाइड्रोजन तो निकाल लेंगे, बट कार्बन को फिर भी हैंडल करना पड़ेगा. तो इसलिए उन्होंने कहा है कि इट विल बी ब्लू हाइड्रोजन फ्रॉम अ कार्बन बेस्ड सोर्स, बट कार्बन को हम हवा में छोड़ेंगे नहीं, पकड़ के कैप्चर कर लेंगे और फिर यूज करेंगे या स्टोरेज करेंगे. नाउ इन इंडिया, सिंस वी हैव सो मच ऑफ कोल, अभी हम लोगों ने वो डॉक्टर मल्होत्रा से वो बनवा ली है, वो रिपोर्ट का ज़्यादा चर्चा नहीं हुआ. आई थिंक वी नीड टू दैट कोल टू हाइड्रोजन रिपोर्ट वी रिलीज इन बॉम्बे, दैट नीड्स टू बी मेन स्ट्रीम. सो वी हैड डॉक्टर R.K. मल्होत्रा, ये फॉरवर्ड अपने CMD IOC, ही वॉज वर्किंग ऑन हाइड्रोजन व्हेन आई वाज द डायरेक्टर इन पेट्रोलियम मिनिस्ट्री. ही इज द फोरमोस्ट अथॉरिटी. 2003-4 से ही वॉज ED of IOC R&D in Faridabad, then he became director. So if we can have a blue hydrogen route through coal, what is the problem? I generally mentioned it to Mr. Mehtab Khan कि आप लोग हाइड्रोजन में कुछ कर रहे हो, कहते हैं I am not in favor. मैंने कहा sir, why you not in favor? We will talk about it. So that is my first question to you, that what is your advocacy? Secondly, हम जब भी decarbonization की बातें करते हैं, तो इट सीम्स दैट कितनी रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी हम लोग, द पेस एट विच द कंट्री कैन सप्लाई RE विल डिटरमिन द डिकार्बनाइजेशन. हम मान के चलते हैं कि कोला तो मतलब गंदी चीज है, इसको जैसे कुछ आएगा इसको हम छोड़ देंगे, ऑयल को भी हम कर देंगे, इलेक्ट्रिक मोबिलिटी आ जाएगी. तो इट सीम्स दैट एट एवरी टारगेट 2030 का टारगेट हमने जो ग्लासगो में दे दिया वो 500 दे दिया. अब आपने यहाँ 6000 की बात की है, कितने की बात की है? जब हमने ISS बनाया था तो 2047 में 650 सोलर, 650 विंड, तो लोगों ने कहा था पागल हो तुम लोग, अब 6000 की बात पे चल रही है. तो इट सीम्स दैट द मार्च ऑफ renewables is the only determinant as to at what rate we will decarbonize. What about the costing? Now, coal Incidentally, Dr. Mathur has a very close association with coal. She grew up in Dhanbad. So she's also a friend of coal.
And my PhD was on coal.
PhD is also on coal. Very good. And that also you went and did it in Japan. So Kyoto University people must be still wondering.
They use a lot of coal incidentally.
They use a lot of coal, of course they do. So the point is that if right now, you know what they're doing? They have given renewables a free ride over coal-based transmission. So जो transmission जो power grid लेता है, is financed by coal. Now, as the share of coal keeps diminishing, it will not be able to load it. If you load it, it will keep becoming more expensive. Then it will shrink faster. So ultimately, renewable will have to be cost reflective. तो रिन्यूएबल की जो बिजली है, अगर वो अपने ट्रांसमिशन का खर्चा उस पर उठे, अभी क्या है कि शाम को जब सूर्यदेव चले जाते हैं तो हम चुपचाप लाइट ऑन करते हैं तो वो दादरी के एनटीपीसी की बिजली आ जाती है, तो वो बेचारा दिन में बंद रखे कुछ भी करे, उसके टरबाइन खराब हो रही है, हीट रेट उसका बढ़ रहा है. तो द डे रिन्यूएबल की असलियत सामने आ जाए और उधर ये दूर दराज के पंजाब हरियाणा के प्लांट बंद हो जाए और सीपत, कोरबा, कैलगांव, फरक्का, तालचेर जहाँ पे मुश्किल से 2-2.5 रुपए का सोलर कोले की बिजली आती है, तो इकोनॉमिक्स किस हद तक डिकार्बोनेशन को ड्राइव करेगी? देयर आर टू क्वेश्चंस अबाउट दिस.
I think they are, I think, the most important questions, and I think much of the discussion, like you're rightly saying, starts from the point where we are, in some sense, assuming that RE is the game changer. We must go towards RE as a panacea for all our challenges. I mean, I agree there that the need to look at that life cycle costing of what works for whom and where is again something which is very important, because even the landed cost of coal at different points, the amount of if you look at the entire value chains of even the resources of solar and wind, where the resources are located, at what points they get generated, where the RE is likely to be available, and compare across the entire value chains at the consumer level without any taxes and subsidies, and you do a like-to-like comparison, probably the picturization may be very different. So we are talking about user end prices or bid prices, and those always look good, saying RE has come down to this level or that level, but it's not true for the entire user segment or the entire spate of technologies. So doing a deeper analysis, and that's where I say the next 2 decades, we have to now break it down into bite-sized pieces to see how much, where, when, and continue to make these decisions in a more concrete way, rather than going with a target and say, okay, we have to fulfill the target. So like you're rightly saying, if you haven't planned enough, then it becomes very difficult to ramp up or down a capacity of base-loaded plants. The same logic I would also bring in for the looking at the retirement of coal-based power plants. So, okay, there are some plants which we have done our due diligence in terms of saying that they are inefficient or very aged and so on. But if you look at the US, there are still plants which are running which are of the 50s or 60s and so on. Why? I mean, if the economics is so good, and if there are alternatives, why don't they shut it down? And they are much richer countries than countries like us. The economic lives of all these plants have of course been finished decades ago. But even with the physical life, if they can generate a unit where they are not having to make new greenfield investment, they're keeping it on. So I mean, I think it's important to look as to why people are continuing to talk about not shutting down every coal plant, why it's important to talk about why people are looking at gas-based hydrogen in other countries, and not completely debar them as potential solutions for certain things. That said, coming to the blue hydrogen part of the story, maybe it works for certain areas, but again, I think looking at the larger transition, we need to be very careful also about what kind of infrastructure or processes do we put in in terms of their continuity over time. If at some point green hydrogen is going to become the chosen technology and it's got
नहीं, ये
a
ऊर्जा गंगा निकल रही है पाइपलाइन झारखंड से,
हाँ,
नेचुरल गैस की पाइपलाइन जा रही है. हम अगर ये, अच्छा आपने कहा है कि नेचुरल गैस में 20% हाइड्रोजन ब्लेंड किया जा सकता है, 20% है ना राजनाथ?
हाँ, वो CGD नेटवर्क.
तो ये हम अगर झारखंड में जहाँ हमारा कोला है, तो अगर हम वहाँ पे हाइड्रोजन बनाते हैं कोले से, हम हाइड्रोजन नेचुरल गैस की पाइपलाइन में डाल देंगे, तो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर भी रेडीली अवेलेबल है.
Yes.
और हमारे भी इतनी बड़ी बड़ी डी कोल्ड एरियाज हैं, बहुत बड़े लैंडलॉर्ड हैं, नागराज हैंडल्स हैं, बिगेस्ट लैंडलॉर्ड्स ऑफ द कंट्री. तो वो डी कोल्ड एरियाज हैं, वहाँ पे अगर नीचे की जियोलॉजी परमिट करेगी तो हम उसको पंप भी कर सकते हैं, अंदर स्टोरेज कर सकते हैं, या जो भी ब्रिकेट्स विकेट्स बनाना, जो भी पॉलीमर बनाना, कुछ बना सकते हैं.
I think our transition needs to be transitional, but keeping in mind, when we do invest in something, what kind of a life are we looking at ahead, and how amenable is it to another change? We'll have to be flexible in our planning going ahead. Taking all the calls today for 2070 should not be the name of the game. It should be what do you do today, what do you do 5 years later, and so on. And all of these plans will need to evolve, because nobody today knows the status of technology in 2070. When we say 7,000 gigawatt, that's based on today's knowledge. But tomorrow, what kind of improvement may happen, or we may just switch to something else, is a completely different argument. So.
चलिए.
Seems this very, very.
One more thing is there, sir. How we are placed with the minerals with regard to RE and batteries. All lithium, cobalt, nickel, everything is to be imported. Seeing the scenario, when Russia comes in, anything can happen in future. So we should be focusing on the sources which are in our hand.
Yeah.
So I think we should look for CCUS and continue using coal power or other resources.
I got for two queries, ma'am. Number one is the coal consumption by bricks actually. So the coal consumption is at least more than the coking coal consumption in the country, and even after blending with biomass, I don't foresee coal being totally replaced by that, and this industry is going to survive at least till 2070 or whatever is there. So when we speak about this thing, just transition, this is a huge chunk, around 10% of the total coal which is being consumed by the non-power industry, and we are trying to electrify the processes in steel and aluminium everywhere else and trying to electrify that. But this process is, nobody is putting in research also, and nobody is paying attention also. So this amount of coal will continuously being demanded by the economy without any R&D being put into that area. So this is going to be our long-term issue where continuously these coal emissions are going to come. This is one point, right? And second was, many times we find we are having a suggestion in terms of atomic power. But for atomic power, there are two issues which we are not addressing. One is that it is basically controlled by the governments throughout the world. Private sector or private industry participation in the research and development in this field is more or less restricted, and it is hugely dependent on governments. And governments are not funding. So practically we don't have new or efficient generators or atomic reactors, because everything is depending on simulation only. We don't have any practical grounds to carry out trials. And secondly, the disposal of the nuclear waste. The biggest developed country, most advanced country like US, even with the maximum they could have planned, they are now struggling to dispose of their nuclear waste, which is going to be a hazard for next 1 billion years. So if I am trying to protect my planet today, but maybe by this atomic I am going to waste my planet for another 1 billion years where it cannot be recovered also. So this aspect, normally when we try to give a push for atomic energy, we are normally ignoring that, and we are only counting only on the carbon which is coming into the environment and not the waste which cannot be disposed of or liquidated.
So again, just respond to the question on bricks, I think that's the one area which is extremely important, and I did mention that the others part of industry which we don't talk about even internally so much, is very important to focus on. Externally, of course, the world would want us to continue thinking and talking only about the energy intensive sectors in terms of cement, iron and steel and aluminum and so on. So if you look at some of the assessments which are done by the developed countries for India, they talk only about the energy intensive sectors and miss out the energy which is consumed by the entire industry sector, even whether it's captive or whether it's bricks or the small foundries. But a large part of our problem is going to remain in that areas. Like you said, bricks are not probably going anywhere, but and probably needed. So again, these are some things which are interrelated among sectors, whether the demand itself can shift away to other materials or should shift away to other materials. There is immense pressure on the building side to say, bricks should do a transition and move towards glass or whatever. But are glass facades the best thing for a country like India in this climate, in this situation? What would it do to costs? So there are multiple issues which come up, as a starting point, but also as a sectoral point in terms of us needing to look at alternatives or whether there are alternatives at all in smaller sectors as well. And on atomic power, Mr. Rajnath, would you like to?
A couple of points I just wanted to highlight. One, with regard to the position that we have made, is just one of the scenario for net zero pathway. It doesn't mean that the coal story ends by 2047 or so. अगर आपको net zero 2070 लाना है तो this could be one possible pathway and supported by the other means. Suppose अगर nuclear नहीं आता है, बाकी चीजें नहीं आती, then coal story. But coal का basically the whole thing is coal को downsize करना है. I mean that's the whole story about it. And this, with regard to the nuclear, now globally there are about 70 such R&D and innovations happening in the SMR, a small modular reactor. Some are in the conceptualization, some are on the implementation is जिसमें licensing वगैरह भी हो रहा है. So this small modular reactor of a capacity less than 300 megawatt, and this can be of a modular kind of thing. You can be a small size, you can transport it, settle down. I mean, build, own, operate, and you can decommission also. Those are the development happening, and it's being led by the private sector also. Government, of course, they are the major stakeholder, but it's all the development is being taken by the yes. That we see in the nuclear sector. As of now, we are going for the larger sector, more than 7,700 megawatt or 1,000 megawatt, this kind of stuff. उसका फिर जो fuel because disposal, that's the liability part is also major, so nobody is coming forward. अगर ये small modular reactor आ जाता है तो there will be issues based on it.
So I think there's a question on CCU so far, we've also been a little dismissive in the government about
CCUs can take up, sir, but only thing is as of now, you see commerciality अभी.
मेरा कुछ और कहना है. मेरा ये कहना है कि we have acknowledged that we like it, the world likes it or doesn't like it. India will stay with coal-based power for the next 20 years or so. ठीक है ना? Now, to generate power, presently, you take coal to a power plant and you burn it, you combust it. When you combust it, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, etc. comes up. Now, why can't we conceive the coal to power story through the hydrogen path? देखिए, अभी आपने बताया 230 220 समथिंग गीगावाट आपकी कैपेसिटी है कोल बेस्ड पावर की. इसमें से 40-50,000 स्क्रैप करने लायक है. वेदर यू स्क्रैप इट फुली और एज यू सेड कि वी आर ऑल्सो डिस्कसिंग नेवली लिग्नाइट, यू कीप देम एज कैपेसिटी प्लांट्स कि जब ये स्पेकुलेटिव ऊपर नीचे बिजली जाती है तो चला लिया करेंगे, बाकी बंद रखेंगे. बट रेगुलर ऑपरेशन से 30-40,000 तो निकलेगा ही निकलेगा। एंड इंडिया की एनर्जी डिमांड जैसे बढ़ रही है, इस साल क्राइसिस देखा है, अब एनटीपीसी भी वापस लाइन पे आ गया है। आई मीन आई यूज्ड टू टेल गुरदीप लास्ट ईयर व्हेन ही डिक्लेयर्ड द सीएमडी दैट आई विल नॉट सेट अप एनी मोर ग्रीनफील्ड प्लांट। मैंने कहा व्हाट काइंड ऑफ अ स्टेटमेंट हैव यू मेड? इज अ मौसम को देख के, तो नाउ मौसम को देख के ही हैज सेड ही इज गोइंग टू सेट अप अ न्यू वन आल्सो। तो ये जो नए प्लांट लगेंगे इसमें एमिशन तो होना ही होना है राजनाथ। अगर हम इसको कोल को हाइड्रोजन बना ले और हाइड्रोजन को जला के बिजली बना ले तो वो प्रोसेस की एफिशिएंसी बढ़ जाएगी। अभी जो 35-36%, 33% सब क्रिटिकल, अभी 38-39 मिलता है, अल्ट्रा सुपर क्रिटिकल तो आ नहीं पाया। तो ये हाइड्रोजन टू पावर वाला जो प्रोसेस है, इट मे बी मोर एफिशिएंट देन इवन 40-42%, बिकॉज कन्वर्जन रेट्स वगैरह जो होंगे, हीट लॉसेस कम होंगे। तो इसको क्यों नहीं आप लोग एडवोकेट करते?
पीएमओ वाली जो एक नोट है, उसमें हम लोग जैसे इंपोर्टेड कोल बेस्ड पावर प्लांट्स हैं, उसमें हमने कहा कि पायलट पे अमोनिया को फायरिंग क्यों ना कराई।
हाँ ठीक है, जापान इज गोइंग दैट रूट, जापान इज नाउ गोइंग ऑन अमोनिया रूट। अच्छा, आई मे हैव टू गेट सम विजिटर। मेरे जाने के पहले इफ यू कैन काइंडली, आप लोग हमारी मिनिस्ट्री के साथ क्या कोलैबोरेटिव रिसर्च या व्हाट इज द guidance that NITI Aayog can give to this ministry for the future roadmap of coal? हम लोग लाख कहते रहे कि बोलो तो बोलो।
सर अभी लास्ट मतलब इससे जस्ट पहले भी आईआईटी प्रोफेसर ने प्रेजेंटेशन दिया था एंड देयर स्टडी वाज मेनली ऑन फ्यूचर सिनेरियो ऑफ कोल इन इंडिया। आप
लोग सबका इंट्रोडक्शन तो हो चुका है ना। ये डेप्यूटी रीजनल स्टैटिस्टिक्स हैं संतोष, एडिशनल सेक्रेटरी, जॉइंट सेक्रेटरीज। तो डॉक्टर रितु माथुर का परिचय मैंने दिया, शी वॉज माई गाइड फॉर माई PhD एंड शी हैज बीन अ मॉडलर इन टेरी वे शी स्पेंट ऑल हर लाइफ। नाउ शी इज इन नीति आयोग एंड ऑफ कोर्स राजनाथ हमारा साथी है पुराना। सो दे आर द राइट पीपल, दे आर फ्रेंड्स ऑफ कोल, दे हैव अ बैलेंस्ड अप्रोच। सो आई थिंक हम लोग लाख कहते रहे कि कोल का फ्यूचर है, कोल चलना चाहिए, और लोग मौसम देख के बोलते रहे, कम से कम नीति आयोग को बैलेंस्ड व्यू जी बताइए।
Last presentation किया IIT professors ने, in that they included only, they were talking about mainly coal, there was no mixture of other sectors. So like ma'am's presentation was comprehensive, it included all the sectors, so that way she can guide them because that part was missing in their presentation.
IIT Delhi?
IIT Delhi is doing one study.
हाँ नहीं, उन्होंने हमसे वो रोहित आया था, उसको इन लोगों को मैंने बोला हमारे पास एक R&D की स्कीम है, अतुल भी एक प्रोजेक्ट प्रपोज कर रहा है, हमारी जो R&D की स्कीम है उसमें शायद 3-4 करोड़ रुपया है, 3 to 4 करोड़ रुपीस। वो सब के सब हाईटेक एरियाज में, अंडरग्राउंड माइन में मीथेन कैसे स्मेल करना, सेफ्टी ये सब करना, बट देयर आर नो स्टडीज बीइंग प्रेजेंटेड टू अस ऑन पॉलिसी, ऑन फ्यूचर रोड मैप्स। तो ये रोहित जो है IIT में जो पब्लिक पॉलिसी सेंटर खुला है, उसने एक प्रोजेक्ट सुबह सबमिट किया है। बट माय क्वेश्चन, इफ यू कैन एंड देन मे बी अदर क्वेश्चंस कैन फॉलो लेटर, व्हाट हैव यू थॉट थ्रू, आपके जो मॉडलिंग सेंटर आपने सेटअप किया है अभी, कि हमारी मिनिस्ट्री के साथ या कोल इंडिया के साथ मिलकर कुछ स्टडीज वगैरह आप लोग करना चाहते हो? जल्दी से सोचो, जल्दी से सोचो। So Nagaraj, please carry on the show. I'll just start. Okay. See you.
Anyone wants to make comments?
Ma'am,
Bhavani?
actually India is planning a large installed capacity of renewable energy in coming years. So whether any study has been done that what is the maximum percentage of renewable energy which can be accommodated in our grid, national grid? Because with the renewable energy, even with the battery storage system, the management of grid is specifically the supplying of reactive power, that is going to be a huge challenge.
The grid balancing which US is also facing.
बस ये कि एक स्टडी है जिसमें वो कहते हैं कि 17 to 20% with the existing grid absolutely no problem. You can penetrate your, but इसके beyond जाएंगे तो you have to create additional transmission corridors.
The transmission corridors are reactive power. The main challenge will be the supplying of reactive power. In case we are doing the generation from the rotary machines like generator, then reactive power can be supplied. But in case we are generating from solar system or maybe wind energy, from wind energy it can be supplied, but especially in the solar system, that is going to be a huge challenge.
Studies have started. I mean, there are few studies, but again, they have their limitations in terms of how what they can.
No, some states still they are facing problems like Karnataka, etc. Their RE power is more than 50% in their overall generation. Now they are shifting their uh, like agriculture law. Earlier they used to give in the evening time. Now they are managing that agriculture demand during the daytime, and your solar generation is very high. It has two implications. First, it reduces the आपको जो सब्सिडी देते हैं एग्रीकल्चर में is low cost power, so they are offsetting with that. Similarly, Gujarat is also shifting क्योंकि उसमें curtailment वगैरह का issue आ रहा है ना. Many states they are facing the issues of curtailment.
But reactive का issue तो agriculture में भी आएगा.
Issue आएगा, but
mostly reactive power.
Again the storage requirement that has to play a major role. उसमें अभी कम हमारा कुछ तो है.
This is what he's saying is US is also facing the same thing. They are having wind at the coastal areas, but the main grid capacity that is installed somewhere else. So evacuating power from the coast and back to New York, DC and all those things, that is the greatest challenge which they are right now facing on reactive power.
So unless we have the storage, it will be a very difficult.
Breakthrough energy storage technology. That is most important.
DC ने एक proposal तो निकाला है कि 42 gigawatt का they will come out with the storage. They are planning for some viability gap funding for battery plus pump hydro storage.
So the battery also will not be able to provide reactive power.
Again,
we have to go for either pumped hydro.
Again the आपकी जो large hydro है, that has to also play a major role.
Yes, sir.
Large hydro जो हमारी अभी we are just able to extract only 1/3 of the capacity. 150 के against हमारा 47 के आसपास ही हुआ है. So that need to be expedited. But ये pump hydro तो हमको बहुत large scale में ले जाना पड़ेगा.
Yes. It's a hydro has its own challenge.
No, but अभी उसमें प्राइवेट सेक्टर को पहले दिया गया, प्राइवेट सेक्टर was not able to extract, तो वो इंस्टॉल नहीं कर पाया, उनकी अपनी वो प्रॉब्लम्स थी. Now government is thinking to give it to the CPSEs on a selective basis. At least उनके पास जो capacity है, they can develop. That's the thinking going on.
But the major issue is forest clearance.
वो तो अभी भी है, वो तो आप किसी भी
that will be there with the CPSUs also.
Forest clearance is the major issue anyway. आपको environment तो मिल जाता है, but forest में problem है maximum.
Ma'am, I have one question. These modeling scenarios that we do for the change, you very rightly said it has to be tempered by realism. Like as sir said, depends on any. There's a trigger of a climate event. Suddenly, all the policy is overturned on its head. Finance, I think, would be a big issue when we talk of all these technologies that will be coming on. Are we passively waiting for these technologies to come on, or are we engaging with the private sector? Because finance would be a big elephant in the room, which I don't think government has the wherewithal as of now to manage. Finance will have to engage with the private sector, with the civil society, also for acceptance. So, what is your view on that?
I mean, one of the biggest hurdles is going to be finance, the investment outside, and which is why I think involving the private sector in whatever changes are needed, that becomes very important. That said, again, it will like there are challenges. For example, when we are talking about some of the just transition issues, when we are talking about increases in prices, how do we manage the social and the equity side of things becomes as important. So sometimes a balance, according to me, is important to be kept between what the government sort of looks at in terms of its planning and how we motivate the private sector to invest. So when it comes to technology and solutions, I think we need to be very open with the private sector in enabling that channelization of investment. But when it comes to the decisions, I think those decisions need to be well grounded in terms of the government looking at a very comprehensive view of what is right for us. I think India's context is so very different that we should be very sensitive to what we pick up. There's a lot of pressure also from the developed world and from all kinds of lobbies to sort of say this is the only way to go, or this is exactly what you must do. But I think this is where, as India, we have to put our foot down to say we have some things which work in our favor, and we think X, Y, Z are the ways to go forward in this time frame, short term, medium term, long term, and take a very calculated, judged kind of view on what exactly we do. So even in terms of the alternative technologies on coal, what can we do with regard to IGCC or the blue hydrogen? So working out what works best for us in totality, I think is an imperative we should take upon us.
I would just like to invite your attention to that transport sector. You said we are more focused on this transport and industry. Coal has always been kind of a favorite whipping boy of everybody. And transport, like we have heard of recent incidents of the EV fiascos. So now suddenly, now the backward explanation is those are not tropicalized, maybe the battery, and it came from the minister. The vibration and the heat is not maybe conducive to having those batteries with us. So we don't do this thought process before we bring it on, because as an emerging economy, I think our country is very cost sensitive. So what is change management to expect people to switch over? This would be, I think, it has some cost built in. So how can we make it more acceptable to people if the cost is so high and then the technology is not proven? It's just being kind of rolled on too fast.
EV, I mean, that way, my own personal sense is that it is picking up in many other countries as well. So in terms of technology, to some level, there is sort of,
I think we'll not. Now we have another meeting with Minister at 1 o'clock.
Conditions here may make it very different in terms of what kind of study or
we'll finish last question.
Minister.
Gestation we must do within the country before rolling out something in a very large scale. And then the second thing that I within longer term is very important. We have a goal, but then how do we go there? Do we make a target too high immediately?
Yeah, anybody from the field, any coal company officers have any questions you want to make comment? No questions? Okay, Darshan?
Madam, I have a question. The research stations are bullish on hydrogen, especially green hydrogen, battery storage and solar panels. What is the reason behind it? Have they attained the ultimate disruptive technology, or they are just utilizing the PLI initiative of the government? And is it a alarm bell for coal?
It's not an easy question to answer anyways. It's a difficult one for me as well. But I mean, I would just say it, that some opportunities sort of are there, and we have to look at opportunities, risk, and then assessment. So in a longer term, I would say renewables are good. Solar is probably good because again we are rich on that resource. India is blessed with solar resources. How the technology matures, when the batteries become viable, whether we are able to, whether we have enough raw materials to manufacture these locally, how the costs work in our favor or not in our favor, those are baby steps we must take in doing our analysis very well before we agree on how much to go ahead and how much to have that trade-off with coal. So in that, I'm not saying we have to study things only on the RE side. We have to as much study things on the coal side to make sure that we find the best fits at every juncture for every need. So I think directionally solar is good. Directionally green hydrogen is good. There are opportunities, and if it works out, win-win for India in the long run. But what we do in the short to medium term needs a deeper analysis, which definitely is.
My gut feeling is that they have got something under their belt.
No, they are doing research. They are doing research. They are making technology.
Yeah.
Generation for green hydrogen is even higher because उनका RE बहुत महंगा होता है वहाँ पे. See, in the entire this green hydrogen, electricity cost is a major portion. 60 to 70% cost comes from the electricity, and the rest is the balance of plants and all the materials etc. तो वो आपको 60-70% कॉस्ट को मैनेज करना है. हाउ टू ब्रिंग दैट कॉस्ट डाउन इज द मेजर चैलेंज फॉर अस, एंड देयर द कॉस्ट ऑफ कैपिटल इज क्रिटिकल. हमारे यहाँ तो 10-11% मिलता है ना, वहाँ पे वो 3-4%. So 30% difference we can make because of the cost of capital. उतना हमारी RE cheaper हो जाएगी. The second aspect is the हमारे पास जो global horizontal irradiance जो है, जो सोलर का इंसुलेशन होता है, very few pockets in India is very good. We are equally good with the Middle East, Chile and other countries. उसमें राजस्थान है जो आपका GIB वाला जो भी केसेस है, पार्ट ऑफ मध्य प्रदेश, लद्दाख है, फिर तमिलनाडु का कुछ पोर्शन है. सम पॉकेट्स आर वेरी गुड जहाँ पे आपको, एंड दैट मेक्स 20% आपका जो कॉस्ट है ना वो उनसे आप लोअर हो जाते हैं. तो वी हैव टू एनालाइज दोज एस्पेक्ट्स. और एक तो लैंड पार्सल हमें बनाना पड़ेगा, दोज आर थिंग, एंड कॉस्ट ऑफ कैपिटल इज क्रिटिकल. Then only we can excel in the green hydrogen economy.
सर जहाँ तक मैंने पढ़ा है, पेपर में आया था, IIT बॉम्बे they claim to have attained hydrocarbon parity in green hydrogen production using magnetic direction in the electrolyzation of water.
तो इलेक्ट्रोलिसिस से ही तो बनेगा वो green hydrogen. तो स्प्लिट करेंगे आप.
Okay, I think we'll close down. I will give one. I think, but NITI Aayog, are you also studying and projecting the socio-economic implications of phasing out the coal?
आपको just transition वाली स्टडी चल रही है सर.
No, that is a different. This is
just transition of you pick everything ना, social impact और वो सब everything.
No, this is only for certain mines. Okay, it's not. We are not going to design.
आपके यहाँ जो काम चल रहा है ना वर्ल्ड बैंक वाला, वो that's for certain mines.
Mines.
But हम लोग का total रहेगा.
नहीं.
वो माइंस के ऊपर से ही वो आएगा, फुल रूट आएगा, ऑल रीजनल एंड कोल सेक्टर की बात होगा. लेकिन we are now concentrating on only on
specific
mines.
See, what I want is,
हम हरदम बोल रहे हैं वो 30 साल के बाद होगा, देखेंगे.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, whenever you talk about transition, you need to at least draw attention to the socio-economic implications on the coal mining areas. Okay, livelihoods, employment, the poverty reduction, and then the industries and the revenues to the states. These aspects have to be kept in mind. That's it. So this has to be drawn in mind. Yeah. The second one is, in Western countries, I have seen consumers are offered choice whether you want to RE power or fossil fuel power, and RE power is a higher cost. Those who are very loving nature and all those things, they are going for this, and fossil power, they are getting fossil little lower cost. Can we do it the same? In fact, I know, I have seconds, I have lived, so they offer you this thing. I also offer you mixture, 30% RE, 40% RE, and then little higher this thing, so that at least transmission costs can be transitioned. Otherwise, if you don't transition the transmission costs of RE, at a time when you do it, India, there will be revolutions everywhere. Suddenly the price will go up, everybody will agitate, tire burning, shop burning, everything happen. So I think this also have to be kept in mind. Some strategy has to be done.
So in that case, then again you have to provide more power, different kind of power to the exchange.
Yeah.
So that people have option to take the different kind of. अभी तुम्हारे पास 9% ही से profit. So we have to.
So that also has to be part of your transition thinking. Anyway, now I think.
One article of Ajay
Yeah.
that he has advocated that why there is a power cut, we should provide options to the rich people. If they want to use power, they can consume it at a higher rate.
Especially all journalists who are writing, transitioning.
टैरिफ की बात होती है वो आपका रेजिडेंशियल में तो है नहीं ना कमर्शियल एंड इंडस्ट्रीज को यू आर charging different rates, but not with the residential.
That's what he was advocating. It should be done for residential purposes.
But again, our masses are a very different lot as compared to other countries.
Practicality भी होना चाहिए, acceptability होना चाहिए, सब कुछ होना चाहिए.
I mean, and our middle income group is so large, so they would be worse off maybe with an increase in.
Yeah. No questions. Then. I would like to thank the NITI Aayog team and ma'am, this presentation
very strong team
was very simple, elegant, and I must say non-buzzy, totally dejargonized, which you all I think was very interesting and enlightening for us. I thank the NITI Aayog team, and from the discussions we need more such discussions. I feel we check most of the boxes that are required to be checked for moving ahead, and as ma'am said, we have to be realistic, and we have a bigger target, but we need to be flexible.
They must.
So, I thank the NITI Aayog team, and I hope we have more such interactions. And sir, with your permission, I would like to inform all are cordially invited to have lunch. We have just served soup, and lunch is served in the next room. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Rajnath. Thank you. Thank you. Good to
Well,
see you.
can we get the copy of the presentation?
Yeah. You can just send it to.
We'll put it on our website.
Yeah. No, send it to the
Not the website. It is for your own.